I think just under the transitions, you go
There we
to,
go. There we go. Yeah.
oh, there we go.
There we go. So let's back up. I'm sure you want the disclaimer, right?
So that's, I'm going to go real quick. This is just general information. Does not intended to constitute customs or legal advice. I'm just obliged to say this all the time. If you've got specific information or questions, certainly they're unique. You can certainly reach out to us or myself at this KUSMA at that email. So that's it. So the agenda, what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly go through a brief introduction, sort of KUSMA, USMCA, and then start digging a little deeper at some of the changes specific to garments, action sports gear, some of those products. They're going to look at TPL program because that's very important under the new agreement. And then we're going to take a look at, so the new agreement, it's really, I believe, is a time for new skills and a time to kind of embrace, what's going on. And certainly during these pandemic times, it's, Ruth and I were talking earlier, it's beholden upon small and medium-sized companies to actually spearhead the recovery both in Canada and the United States. We can't sit back and let the big guys do this. It's actually going to be in the backs of the small, medium-sized companies. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about tariff engineering, which I think is very, very important and these days. And then talk about opportunities under KUSMA for SMEs. And then some takeaways. And then if we got time for questions and answers. At the end of this presentation, there's actually another abstract from a presentation that I've done for people on certifying in the certification process under the USMCA, and it really goes sort of step by step how you fill out a NAFTA certificate, or pardon me, the old NAFTA certificate, which is now the new KUSMA certification. So it's there, and then there's some link to some active sites that I think you should have. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So I just had to put the traditional signing. This agreement took place July 1st, 2020. Not going to go into all the issues involved in the political statements we can make, but just had to put a picture of the three amigos on there. So let's go to the next one. So unfortunately, we have one agreement, and because NAFTA is part of the bid for the presidency in the United States, is that the president of the United States was going to tear up NAFTA. We're not allowed to call it NAFTA. So they haven't formally called it an agreement. So Canada calls it the KUSMA, and the United States calls it the USMCA. And of course, Mexico decided they better call it something, so they call it TMEC. I go back and forth between KUSMA and USMCA depending on which agency I'm talking to, but informally we call it NAFTA 2.0 or new NAFTA. So next slide, thanks. So it started July 1st, 2020. Some of the big takeaways from this, without digging into specifics, is the NAFTA certificate is gone. There's actually a certification process in place. Another item is refunds into Canada are extended to 4 years, which is very good for importers in Canada. It used to be 1 year under NAFTA. There's no changes within the United States or Mexico. Mexico is 3.5 years, and the United States is still up to 1 year. All advanced rulings under NAFTA are no longer valid. So if you have a NAFTA ruling specific to your products, it's not in place anymore, and it's beholden upon you to actually get with a trade source or put it in yourself and apply for a new ruling under the USMCA. Courier shipments from US, Mexico, valued under $150. Now we've raised our de minimis level, which are now duty-free into Canada. Up until then, recently, it's only been $20. So this is good for samples and items coming in. This is regardless on the country of origin of the product. If it comes in and it's under 150 Canadian dollars, it's duty-free, and if it's under $40, it's actually tax-free. So if you're dealing in an e-commerce environment. LVS limits were increased to $3,300 from $2,500, and there's no changes under drawback. So next slide, please, Ruth. So there's some major changes from NAFTA. Under the old NAFTA agreement, they did not include a number of groups that had textile components. So the definition of it, I'm not going to read it, but it's there on the screen, is that they've now added groups like luggage, handbags, other articles of textile materials, and items like umbrellas, bedding, furnishing. Those items have been included under the definition. So this is something that they've decided that they felt there was some loopholes in the past, and all three countries decided to add those. So next slide, please. So primary rules for textile and apparel stay the same. There's still a yarn forward rules of origin. It's really, this is no change for NAFTA. The yarns used to make apparel garments must be formed within the free trade area. So there hasn't been a change to the yarn forward rule. So that's still intact. There has been some minor tweaking of some components, and we're going to look at those now. So next slide. So yarns and fabrics that are sourced in USMCA. So if an apparel item, and now you've got a new definition of some items in an apparel item, is made from the following yarns and fabrics, these need to be sourced within the trade agreement region. So in order for the goods to be imported duty-free under the USMCA, and this is keeping TPL separate, this is just to qualify the goods within the USMCA. So quickly, it's there's some HS codes on there that mean things to brokers and some people on the call. A lot of other people, it may look like just a bunch of numbers, but there's certain wools and yarns that must be used to have goods qualify. Same thing with cotton yarns and fabrics, and then you got man-made filaments and knitted or crocheted fabrics. So not a lot of big changes there, but there's just that's itemized specifically. So next slide. So it also requires some parts of apparel items. So this is relatively new. Specifically, the United States felt there were some loopholes that people were taking advantage of to use non-originating products in there. And so, you know, they've actually put some specific wording in to address these items. So next slide, Ruth. So this is, and now I'm going to talk about items that are made within the HS chapter. So as most people that are on the garment side of things, almost all your products, whether they're woven or they're knit, are in chapter 61 and 62. And now they've specifically said that items like narrow elastic bands and fabrics of these headings, chapter 58 or chapter 60, effective 18 months from the start of NAFTA, you'll have to use USMCA products. And so up until recently, you're able to actually have non-originating products, and they would fall in under the de minimis side, and they would still qualify. That's not the case anymore. Also, you know, garments made in chapter 61 and 62, they're sewing threads. And I'm not going to go in the HS codes, but again, sewing threads now, they're going to make effective 12 months from the start of the agreement that you have to use sewing thread that is USMCA origin. So there's a big change because previously you could use Chinese or offshore sewing threads. So also goods made in chapter 61 and 62. 61, first off, is pockets or pocket fabric, bag fabric. 18 months from the start of the agreement must be sourced in the USMCA. So up until recently, you could actually have foreign fabric. It could actually be a pocket put onto a jean or an item or a bag, a pocket bag, and you could still qualify under NAFTA. That won't be the case 18 months from January 1st. And then in chapter 62, they talk about denim fabric. So what they're doing is the denim fabric people are going to have some protection, and that'll be 30 months from July 1st. And then below that, in chapter 62, they talk about items that are other than denim, just a slighter or a lesser time frame. So next slide, Ruth. So this is something that I think people need to really address is the TPL program under the USMCA. You know, thanks to organizations like BC Apparel and Gear, Canadian Apparel Association, US Apparel Footwear Associations, there was a big lobby because they really tried to dismantle this. Unfortunately, there was members, I'm going to pick on the White House right now, that they were trying to take apart the TPL, not understanding what the TPL was used for. And you know, you should be proud that if you're part of these organizations, that
meeting. So yeah,
they were pretty much kept it intact. So and of note, 75% of Canadians' value of apparel exports to the U.S. use TPL. So it's a very important thing. And TPL fulfillment rate for cotton apparel exports to Canada, that's 100%. But I'm going to show a little later. The number is somewhat changed. Global Affairs is always touting that 100% of the TPL allocation is used up, but in fact, it slipped off the last little bit. So. And then we're going to look at some of the what they've expanded some groups with higher utilization, and at the same time they've cut some TPL to certain underutilized groups. So next slide, Ruth. So this is TPL for U.S. apparel imports. So this we're going from Canada into the United States. And so currently, under the NAFTA levels, Canada on the cotton man-made apparel, the NAFTA levels, they had 88,000, just over 88 million SMEs into the United States. And the utilization really hasn't been all that robust. And so they've only utilized about 12%. In 2019, and actually that up until June, I think it was June 20th of 2020, they'd only used up 3% of the year to date. And so what happened is the United States wanted some protection, and Canada gladly granted it. So they actually reduced the TPL access to 40 million SMEs. But again, that number really won't have any impact on people shipping into the United States, because there certainly would be lots of TPL. So, and same thing with wool apparel. Wool apparel, they've reduced slightly, but it really is going to have minimal or no impact. So next slide, please, Russ. So this is TPL for Canada apparel imports. So this is the important one for anybody bringing product in to Canada, because under NAFTA and also under the USMCA, there still is a lot of people abusing the ability to fill out a NAFTA or a USMCA certificate of origin and declare that the goods qualify when in fact they don't qualify. And you get hung up because customs do an audit, find out it doesn't qualify. However, there is TPL to be utilized. So up until 2018, cotton man-made apparel coming in, it was always 100% utilized. It started to tail off in 2019. It was only 84% was the first time that this happened. And then up until June 20th of this year, the year to date was only 32%. So Canada lobbied, and you should be proud that they were successful in increasing this from 9 million SMEs to 20 million SMEs, which is a huge increase in the TPL. So people should take advantage of that in Canada to find companies that are manufacturing garments in the United States from offshore fabrics that don't qualify under the USMCA, but they do get tariff relief. And it's just a matter of seeking out and finding these. So the US was pushing this because they want to promote manufacturing within the United States, and Canada's promoting it because we'd rather pay zero duty than 18% if you can find some manufacturers in the United States. Same thing with wool. Wool was it's really minimal impact. The NAFTA levels were quite small. They've actually increased them substantially but there really is going to be minimal or no impact because it's the utilization has never been fully realized. So next slide, please, Ruth. So this is the thing that, you know, I kind of want to look at is that, you know, the new agreement really looks at for a time for new skills. And, you know, I keep telling people that you should look at the USMCA for opportunities versus barriers. So many people sit back and let trade agreements dictate what happens and don't really plan. So I think it's now you need to get together with trade partners and get a better understanding of what you're importing and exporting, and actually maybe look at designing products and actually building products to qualify. And so this is true for both the USMCA, but it's also true that there's a number of other trade agreements around the world that are in place that Canada's involved in. And so it's just a matter of finding those trade agreements. And I think we need to get away from China as the be all and end all. And I don't want to get into promoting what the current president of the United States says, but you know, there are other countries with tremendous programs in place that have structured trade agreements with Canada, in this case, that you could actually get preferential duty rates. So I think it's now a time to kind of look at it. And what I want to do is introduce the concept of tariff engineering. So next slide, please, Ruth. So tariff engineering under the USMCA. So tariff engineering, really understanding how your goods qualify and how they meet specific rules of origin at the time you design and produce products. So it's not a matter of somebody downstream designing something, producing it, and coming in and saying, oh yeah, let's take a look to see if it qualifies. I think it's time you can actually take a look at your fiber content, materials used, place of manufacture before the goods are manufactured. So this is kind of pushing back where a lot of purchasing people will actually have to get back, push down line to designers and get more involved in the production process versus just the purchasing aspect. So next slide, please. So I'm going to use this example. I pick on them a lot, Columbia Sportswear. So these guys, they're an expert when it comes to tariff engineering. And they learned very early on that most of their items are made abroad, so they align their design process to take advantage of tariff codes. So really, anybody that's listening, that's wearing the ladies that are wearing a Columbia women's shirt, take a look at the tiny pocket that's below your waistline, and you'll find that there's a tiny pocket there. And it's kind of this cutesy thing that until somebody pointed out, I never realized it. But the main purpose is to reduce the duty rate into the United States. And that's because the American tariff policy states that duty rates for blouses, man-made fibers, they can be as high as 26.9%. But if there's a pocket, and doesn't matter how big the pocket is or what it's used for, as long as there is a pocket and it's in the garment and it's below the waist, the duty rate can go as low as 16%. So Columbia, they're masters of this, and they've been doing this for years. There's also examples with Nike, who owns I'm missing the footwear line now, but they designed some shoes that are set up. Pardon me?
Converse you're thinking of?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Converse. That they designed the shoes to fall in line. They didn't change the function of purpose. They just put more felt on the shoe, so it's more in line with a slipper, and they dramatically reduce their duty costs. Same thing. Ford Motor Company designed a motor vehicle years ago, and it's still in place now. That comes in as a car, and then they take the seats out, and magically becomes a truck. And they went from 25% duty down to 10% duty. So this is in place, and it just, a lot of companies need to take advantage of it. So next slide, Ruth. So under SMEs, like I said, need to kind of drive what's going to go on. So I mean, you need to take your firm and educate yourself on specific rules to your firm. So I just want to kind of take a look. sort of at gear bags of man-made textiles. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through in a broker's world without getting in too deep, just some basics of, of 420292, which is gear bags. So next slide, please, Ruth. So in the broker's world and everybody else's world now, this is how the tariff is broken down. So all 190 plus members of the World Trade Organization deal in the first 6 digits around the globe. So whether you're in Canada, the United States, Japan, Mexico, we deal in the first 6 digits. First two digits, in this case 42, are the chapter. That 4 digits are actually called the heading. So 4202 is the heading, 420292 is the subheading, and those are supposed to be identical around the world. There's a few minor issues between member companies, but I would say 99.9% of the tariff on the 6-digit level is identical around the globe. So when people export goods or import goods, we always talk about the first 6 digits. The digits 7 and 8 are actually the duty rate specific to the country. And then the last 2 digits are statistical level. And some countries actually have a 12th digit, which are part of their statistics. But that's just kind of the broker's world. But you need to understand that before you dig into some of how goods qualify under the USMCA. So next slide, please, Ruth. So specific rules of origin. So 420292, USMCA is overwhelming because there's 300 plus rules of origin. What you need to do is find out your product. In this case, these are gear bags. They're made of textiles, and just look to see what the rules are for that product. So, if you have a quick read through this, it talks about you can make 420292 from any other chapter. So it means that if you've got fabric from other chapters, maybe there's a chance you can make these gear bags and have them qualified because fabrics are in other chapters. The only problem is there's a comma and then there's an except. So in this case, you can't have fabric within these groups or yarns within these groups that you can actually make the bag from. So it's really a matter of taking a look to see, is there fabric that is outside the groups that it's noted in there that I can actually make this gear bag and have it qualify under USMCA? So it's a matter of digging into the tariff a little bit and taking a look at how you structure it. So I get involved with some people that will say, how can we manufacture goods to take advantage of trade agreements? Well, this is just the way to do it. You just take a look at the rules of origin and then take a look at bill of materials, take a look at it, go back down the line, see if you can produce it. In this case, looking at this quickly, there's leathers. I don't think leather's in there. So you could actually make gear bags out of leather in the United States or Canada or Mexico, and they would qualify under USMCA. Now, I know by looking at this, a lot of the fabric that is exempt, but there's some gaps in there that you could probably make product out of it from fabric that's sourced from offshore. So next slide, please, Ruth. So again, just a couple other examples. Baseball hats. Baseball hats it's a wide open group. They're not trying to protect anyone under the agreement. So they're just saying that baseball hats are in chapter 6505, and you can change to that heading from any other heading outside that group. You can save 12.5% duty. So you can take fabric from anywhere else in the world you want, make it into baseball hats, and it qualifies in the USMCA. And the other one I just put on there was hiking boots. So I guess the big thing is on takeaways is that I think you need to take advantage of USMCA rules and don't be restricted by them. So I mean, it just needs to you can't become an expert in all things USMCA, but I would say just focus on what your company does and then take a look at it and get help from sources who take time to understand your imports or exports. And I think it's time to expect more from your trading partners and get involved in developing products that meet agreements. A big one these days is CPTPP. It's a little off the topic of USMCA, but there's a lot of companies taking advantage of goods made in Vietnam that qualify under CPTPP and having them produced there. Now, you need to know that there are some specific rules, so you can't just have your garments made in Vietnam using Chinese fabric because it won't qualify. But there are a lot of opportunities under other trade agreements. So again, the USMCA is one, but it just pushes that you need to get involved downstream, sort of development and design of your products. So I think, the big key these days is flexibility and agility, and, and much to the chagrin, and hopefully none of my big brands are listening in on this, is that I keep hearing from the big brands these days that their lunch is being eaten by the small, agile, flexible brands. And I keep hearing them saying over and over that, they've got 1 million items of green coming in, but something viral hit and everybody wants purple. They still have 1 million items of green that they need to sell. And the smaller guys have said, purple sounds good to us. We've blown through green, we're into purple. And so now it's really, I think it's pretty exciting time to be a smaller, medium-sized venture that you're able to take advantage of the marketplace. So next slide, please, Ruth. So there I've kind of wrapped up, compressed about 4 hours into 30 minutes. So on the end of this presentation, which I think will be available to everybody, is a copy of, like I said, useful sources that you can actually take a look at specific rules of origin on products, both that are made in the USMCA regions. And also there's a sort of step-by-step on how you can fill out, if your goods qualify under the USMCA, how you can fill out a certification. The certificate that is there is one that we've developed because there is no NAFTA certificate anymore. There is a certification. And one note is that if you like our certificate, we did not copyright it. You can use it. You can put your logo on it. We're not offended. We won't come after you. It's just, we adopted it because a lot of times it's easier for people to fill out boxes on a form than it is to tell them what needs to go on a form. So we've had a number of our clients have just taken it, adopted it, and it seems easier. Part of their process is to give it to people with their logo on it, and that way they can adopt it as one of their documents. So with that, I'll kind of open up if there's any questions. Ruth, you can fire away, and if I can't answer them, I'll certainly try and get back to you and answer them at follow-up.
Thank you so much, Dave. And I noticed there you put some reference tools and sites, which is awesome.
Well, if you can't sleep at night, you can read them too. They're interesting to, so if unfortunately that USMCA is about 211 pages. If you have problems nodding off, it's worth taking a look at. So.
And I loved the piece that you shared on tariff engineering. When I was working at Lulu, that was something I got involved in on outerwear. And it was, oh my goodness, it was such an eye-opener, right, for us. But yeah, it was interesting because it took us so long once we'd had this aha moment of, oh, if we actually just design our product accordingly, we can actually hit our margins. And the designers actually initially were quite resistive, but they realized that by being able to make more money, that it actually did open up more design opportunities, if that makes sense. But
oh, definitely, yeah. And that's I don't deal with Columbia, so I can pick on them all the time, but they're one that in the United States, I still can't figure out why everybody hasn't adopted it and started putting the small little pocket on ladies' blouses, right? You wouldn't even notice it. It's just on the inside, so it's
fascinating, right? Fascinating.
Yeah.
But I love that, and I also love the piece about the flexibility of the smaller guys. We sometimes, as startups or smaller businesses, there's so much we always feel, we're at a disadvantage to some of our bigger rivals. And so it's nice to always think that actually there are some positives to be, a lot of positives to being smaller and more nimble and agile. So yeah, thank you for reminding us of that. And just, I'm going to do a little bit of a shameless plug while we've got everybody on. We at the BC Apparel and Gear do want to be extremely inclusive and want to include everybody. And therefore, we do have this great membership deal at the moment where it's just $10 for individual membership and $50 for a company. So if you've not already signed up, please do. We want to hear from everybody. And if you've got any friends or colleagues who haven't, just please give them a little bit of a nudge, because those great prices won't be staying that great forever, right? So a little bit of a shameless plug. Okay, let's questions. If anyone's got any questions that they'd like to ask Dave, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. If you're feeling brave and you want to unmute yourself and ask Dave directly, please do. But yeah, I know, Dave, you said to me that there's no question that is silly to ask, right? So if people want to ask you something, very detailed or very basic, right, then that's fine. I can see Simon said tariff engineering firms also did this back in the days of quotas by having a brief into shorts to make them into a bathing suit to give a much lower tariff rate. The brief was pulled out when the goods arrived in Canada. Oh, a little bit of a history lesson there, right? Did you know about that one, Dave?
Yeah, there's people that used to do that and call sets. They'd also put I remember they used to bring in trousers, and they'd include a set, and the set was a vest that was just a liner with a tiny little piece of fabric on it, and they just threw away the vest because sets came in and they avoided quota as well. So,
whoa, not very sustainable though, hey?
No, not really. No, it's yeah.
Yeah, bit counterintuitive there.
Yeah. So,
what would you say, Dave, would be your advice to a startup? Like, what is, if because they've got, if you're an entrepreneur or founder of a small business, you wear so many hats. So what would be the one thing that you would advise people to do? Like, what's that low hanging fruit?
I mean, on importing, exporting.
Sorry, on importing, exporting. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, on the import is really, I think people need to find out more about the products that they're purchasing and how they're made. Just don't believe, unfortunately, we've been on the wrong end with some of our clients where somebody in the United States has said, oh, it's okay, we'll fill out the NAFTA certificate, and they fill it out, and it's fine, they fill it out. However, the liability rests with the importer. So if you force somebody to fill out and sign it, they may not have done their due diligence to see if the goods qualify. And the great thing that's actually happened is that, unfortunately, in the past, that customs, your NAFTA certificate was you could only claim for 1 year. But when customs came in and did an audit, they could go back 4 years. So we would have people that said, well, I just found out my goods didn't qualify, but we could have used TPL. And the thing is, you can't go back and get retroactive TPL because it's beyond the time limit, and you could only go back 1 year for customs. Now with customs with 4 years, if you run into those issues, you could probably go back and put it together. So I mean, it's really, you need to kind of reach out to people, because there's a big fear with Americans that if it's, well, not a fear, a misunderstanding of a lot of Americans that if the goods are made in the United States, regardless how they're made, that they qualify. So it's made in the United States, it says made in the USA, and therefore it should be duty free. And that's just the way it is. That's not the case. There are rules they need to qualify. But, if they tell you how they make them, and if they do manufacture them in the United States, they can qualify. It's just there's a different process in their TPL. And most Americans don't understand that. So, I mean, that's the biggest pitfall on the import side. So it's, export markets now, it's really understanding the Americans. And I'd like to say it's, everything you learned up until the pandemic took place is kind of needs to be tweaked a little bit. People don't have inventories anymore. And I think everybody is a lot more cost conscious, and nobody wants to be caught with large inventories and low consumer demand. So it's, how's that for
That's
a
awesome.
short answer in a long period of time. So.
I've got a couple of great questions here. First one again from Simon. I love this. He's saying, I'm thinking back to your Vietnam factory not being able to use China fabric. How often do offshore manufacturers lie about the fabric country of origin? And second part of the question, what can you do if you suspect your factory is lying? Great question. I love that.
Oh yeah, so great question. And the unfortunate thing is, until you're in customs radar, and I'm going to talk Canada Customs now, CBSA, things would just go along where the goods will come in and you'll claim CPTPP. The problem is that customs, if you're a large enough importer, they may take a look at it, and then they'll reach out to you first, then to your vendors overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And they do have, through their trade embassies and that, they have the ability to take a look at these manufacturers to see if they're using where their fabric's from. So, I mean, it's, you hope that your relationship with the vendors is that they're telling you the truth. I know if you talk to Bob Kirk at the Canadian Apparel Federation, he was somewhat reticent that there was a trade group coming in from Vietnam that was really pushing garment people to have their production done in Vietnam versus China. But at the same time, you take a look at how much fabric does Vietnam produce? Not very much. So it seemed like they were almost enticing people to have them do the manufacturing, but don't worry about it. We'll figure out where the fabric comes from. So I would just say you've got to do your due diligence and be upfront with people. And I think, you know, once we get back to feeling secure enough to travel, I think anybody of any size, and even smaller, medium size, should take the time to go and visit vendors and dig deeper into it, because as the importer, you're the one always at risk. So if you have stories being made, whether it's on USMCA in the States, or if it's somebody in Vietnam manufacturing for you, you need to ensure that they're telling you the straight goods and that you're not the one penalized. Because a lot of times people do whatever they have to sell you the product, but you're the one that will be penalized because you import a record. So.
Totally. Okay, another question here. Thank you for that, Dave. From Lana. I have a startup clothing company starting to look at exporting to the US. Any suggestions on how to send samples to potential buyers, boutiques in the US to consider buying?
Sure. So this is really easy. So into the United States since 2016, they've increased the de minimis rule in the state. So the de minimis is, it's really, it's been in place since 1930. And it's the same rule that when an American crosses the border, comes into Canada, goes shopping for the day, they enter back in the United States. And back in the day, it started at 25 cents in 1930. Now that limit is $800 US. So that any American can cross into Canada every single day, purchase $800 US worth of goods, go back in the United States, and there is no processing fee. They just let them in the United States. Into Canada, we used to be $20. We've just now increased it to $40 for duty and tax, or $150. So you can send your samples as long as they're under $800 US by any kind of express courier, DHL, FedEx. And being a broker, I hate to say it, but there's no customs entry either. Now, as long as it's not subject to any other government agencies, which garments are, so you can send samples to whoever you want in the States, and virtually it's just the cost of freight. So very easy.
Awesome.
And really what you need to do is just put on the documents Section 321 of the Customs Act, and all the couriers will know what to do with it. And it just goes, it gets released off a manifest. So
Section 321.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. And this links into a question from Lexi. And Lexi's asking, for online shopping, it's my understanding the amount previously was 800 retail. So I guess it's talking about the de minimis rule, with no duties to the customer for Canadian goods. Is this still valid? And is it only valid if the fabric is also made in Canada?
No. So this is, And so, Jess, I want to confirm this is going from Canada into the United States?
Yes.
Okay. So Canada, the United States, Section 321 applies to any type of goods whatsoever, anything that's not subject to other government agencies. So you can't ship food, drugs, items that other government garments. There's no other government agencies involved. The only thing sometimes you run into is, I mean, sunglasses because there's US FDA. But garments, there's a lot of companies, specifically small, medium-sized companies, and we're actually working with some larger ones now. They're doing their US e-commerce from Canada because their consumer is buying less than $800 and you can ship it down to them and there's no processing. So yeah, so regardless of where it's made, everything qualifies under Section 321 in the States. Now, the slight caveat is that on June 26, the trade representative, Lightgazer in the United States, is on record saying that the $800 level they believe is a little high and that they're looking at maybe reducing that. If they ever did reduce it, it would not go below, my opinion is below 500 US dollars. So it's still a very high level, but I think there'll be some warning before that happens. It was at $200 since 1983, and so they raised it from $200 to $800. And I was fortunate enough to talk to some people that were part of the negotiating. They were pushing the U.S. government on this, and they really wanted $500. And it's they were told by their trade attorneys that were representing with the White House is that they should push for 800 because somewhere between Congress, Senate, and the president, that would get knocked down to $500. Well, it was Obama's last term. It got rushed through Congress, Senate. Obama signed off on it, and magically it went to $800. They all kind of looked around going, that was a massive increase. So the U.S. has one of the lowest de minimis rates, or highest de minimis rates in the world. Australia is slightly higher in their own currency, is $1,000. In Canada, we're one of the lowest in the world. So, and right now that limit is $40 for both duty and tax. Where the U.S. that's 40 Canadian, and theirs is 800 US dollars. So.
Wow, that's amazing, right? We're so close, like as neighbors.
Well, it cries out that if you're a small, medium-sized company in BC, you should be online selling and shipping to the States, because when somebody puts a credit card down and buys something, other than the freight charge, there is no processing. That can't be, I mean, how many people on the call have bought something online, it comes in from the States, and then UPS is at the door going, hey, I want $120. You go, wait a minute, I spent $400. You know, it happened to me with snow tires, and I was going, I wanted to clear it ourselves, our company, but I didn't get to. So.
I know, and it kind of like loops back to what Amanda was talking about last week on her webinar about, you know, when you do e-commerce, and she was saying, you know, how in her experience, customers don't like hidden, you know, any hidden fees. So I'm just connecting the dots there from what she was talking about, right, and how you can take advantage. So that's really cool. Lexi was also asking, what is the best way to get samples back from the US and not get dinged for duties or taxes?
Okay, so that's a great question. So if you ship samples to the United States, keep a copy of the bill lading that went into the United States. And then when the samples are shipped back, have them put on the invoice that these goods are previously left Canada, and that they're being returned. And so the broker will see that they'll end up clearing them that they're previously imported goods. They're going to come back. They'll be duty free and GST exempt, but you may be questioned to prove that the goods left the country. Usually on samples, it's not an issue, but they could ask that. Most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, it won't happen on samples. So if it was a big sample line, it was a large line and it was expensive, then certainly they might request it. But just keep copy of the bill lading and the proof of export. So.
And should that be in the clear envelope, the bill of lading?
Oh, no, they don't have to have it when it comes back.
Right.
They just have to make a statement on there that these are goods being returned, they're samples. It should be duty-free, GST exempt, and the broker will push it through as under Chapter 98. And no, it's just you may be asked if customs, reviews the entry. So, but like I said, if it's a small sample, they're not going to question it.
I've got a question for you, Dave. Well, people maybe just have a little think if there's anything else they want to ask. Are there any scams involved? Like, where, as you said, you gave the example before of UPS and knocking on the door, blah, blah, blah. Are there people that try and pretend the brokers that you've heard of, or anything that people want to avoid? Anything you've come across that you know of?
I don't think anybody want to pretend to be a broker. I mean, we hold bonds with Canada Customs and U.S. Customs, so they would just whack us and take our bonds. I mean, I haven't heard of any.
You haven't heard of any, right?
No,
okay.
The only thing that happens a fair amount is there's a lot of people that go around as tax recovery or duty recovery people.
Right.
And they will come in and say, hey, we'll get you back all sorts of duty. We just want to look at your books and records, and whatever we get back, we'll give you 50% of what we've found. Those people, I always caution people that, it's kind of like opening your, all your books and records up to a stranger. I know they're going to say they're going to keep it confidential, but, if there's things in there that you don't want anybody else to know about, they're not always not everything just leaves when they leave your door. Sometimes it trickles over to other companies, and they're not usually brokers. It's usually some kind of consulting company. Some of them do some good work. Other ones do some funny things where they'll get your money back, but then the government appeals it, and then they want all the money back, and then the company's saying, well, we got you the money back originally, sorry, we're not following through on it. So that's the only thing I've heard of. So
okay, another question here from Nancy. You mentioned that luggage is now part of apparel in USMCA. Other than the gear bag example, are there any notable changes with suitcases?
I'd have to look specifically at suitcases. All I know is that they've included it because they've realized that things like knapsacks, rucksacks, gear bags, items like that, suitcases are made of textiles, and they wanted to include those within the definition of apparel and textile goods. So I'd have to look at it, So if she drops me a line, I'll take a look at suitcases specifically. So yeah.
Okay, Nancy, if you can drop and just remind us, Dave, of your email for Nancy. Maybe I can put it in the chat for.
Oh yeah, it's dwpentland@carson.ca. It's on the.
Oh, it's on the.
It's on the slide. So yeah.
Oh, Lena was saying that there is a shipping scam that targets small businesses. Oh yeah, cool. And you've had a variation of this happen to you. Yeah, I'm just super skeptical, right? What scams, right?
Yeah, if it sounds like it's too good to be true, it's usually too good to be true. So it's So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then if nobody else has got any more questions, I was just going to ask you, Dave. Obviously you must have throughout your career and through all the different political ebbs and flows, seen a lot of change, especially with our neighbours south of the border. Do you anticipate a lot more change? We've got an election coming up in November. I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, right? But if you were a betting man, what would you predict in your crystal ball?
Well, I hope there's a super big change on November 11th in the United States. That's the thing. I'm without saying specifically what that is. I hope there's a big change. I guess the only thing is this is the first time in my career that I've seen where a sitting president has used presidential powers to jump in and do trade, which is pretty scary. So not so much, even on the garment side, he's using presidential powers to put duty surtaxes on Chinese goods into the United States, and then he did aluminum and steel into the U.S. And so it's a scary time. Other presidents that it's called Section 232. It's actually meant for if the United States is under imminent threat. And that's, you know, is there in case there's acts of war, terrorism, things like that. And unfortunately, the current president uses that as a trade weapon. So that's the only dangerous thing. So, you know, I'm looking at to see what the repercussions, because I know our prime minister missed the party in the White House yesterday with the you know, president of the
Yeah,
United
he
States. And
refused to go, right?
yeah, he heard that it was just quesadillas, and he doesn't really like quesadillas, and so he decided to stay home. So I hope he didn't upset anybody, and something's going to happen. So that's the biggest thing that's kind of going on now. That really, it's, you know, if I'm just there, I'm just sitting on the border where we help people get goods in and out of the border, but if I was a businessman, it's a pretty frightening time to not know what's around the corner. You know, I felt really the pain of all the U.S. importers in the United States when all of a sudden he slapped additional duties on backpacks and garments into the United States at a time that it's too fragile, and it's not as if you can just search and find products in other places. And, you know, now he boasts that he's got a big duty surplus because he's collected all this duty on the backs of the Chinese. It's not on the backs of the Chinese. It's on the backs of Americans paying that duty, or Canadians trying to get products in the States. So that's the big thing that keeps me up at night. So, yeah.
And Lexi was just asking as well, you know, she imports her activewear fabrics from the USA. Is it just China that is having these large increases that we've just been talking about, or others that we are seeing increasing too? Lexi's had to stop using some of her fabrics due to this.
Well, some of it is trickled on the price, because what's happened is people stopped using China products and textiles. And so there's a bigger demand for other countries' products. And of course, the price has gone up. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. She said, sorry, to clarify that the rep imports the Chinese fabrics. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know, and also COVID, you know, that's an area of my specialty, fabric development. And, you know, it's also been interesting to see who reopened first, who, you know, in various different sectors, who was able to even get various different fabrics out. A lot of people changed and pivoted to making PPE equipment or fabrics, again trying to keep going. So it's a very complex situation, isn't it? Lots of variations, a lot of factors that are contributing to this current situation we've got.
Yeah. Hey, I just gonna have one comment, Ruth. I know we're getting close to the hour here. I noticed Caleb from NRI is on the line, so I'm going to suggest that you kind of reach out to them in the future and maybe do a whole you know, lunch hour on Section 321 and e-commerce in the United States using a 3PL. So they operate a 3PL called NRI Distribution, and there's some interesting things where people are shipping to the States for the U.S. market, e-commerce, and getting back their duty in Canada, no duty load in the United States, and and you can actually do that and appear to be in the United States. So without giving away the secret sauce, I'll just make a plug. And Caleb, if you want to reach out to Ruth, or I could certainly give him your bio. But I think it'd be a great topic for a lot of SMEs, specifically in BC, wanting to access the U.S. market. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And thank you so much. We love this, you know, like passing the torch and, you know, suggesting people and suggesting topics, because, yeah, we want to get great webinars out to our members. So, yeah, so Caleb, if you want to come off mute and say hi, that'd be awesome.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, thanks for the plug there, Dave. Dave's absolutely right. We've got quite a few clients taking advantage of the Section 321 benefits, shipping, fulfilling orders from Canada for their U.S. direct-to-consumer customers. So yeah, I mean, just a quick background for NRI Distribution specifically. Our focus is primarily we call it AFA, apparel, footwear, and accessories, lifestyle, outdoor, that kind of thing. But yeah, if anybody has any further questions on that. Dave's definitely got my information. We've got our website, nridistribution.com. Yeah, there's definitely, yeah, if anybody wants anything else from me, just let me know. Yeah, I'm not sure what else information I could provide, but if anybody needs anything further, let me know.
Awesome. I'll be in touch, Caleb, and see if you're open to having a little bit of a further chat.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We're nearly at the top of the hour. Thank you for your time. Thank you to Dave and to Carson International for this great session. I hope everybody learned lots. I know I did. And we will continue the conversation.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Take
Have
care.
a great day. Bye now.
All right. Bye now.